Kia ora koutou, ko Darren Atchison, takuinga. Love a good poem. You'll see from our submission, the written submission, that we oppose the bill for two broad reasons. The bill is a threat to our democracy and a threat to the interests and well-being of children and young people. We're not going to go through that submission in detail. If you've not read, I did read something over the weekend. If you've not read the commentary by Sir Geoffrey Palmer published on Newsroom last week, I urge you to do so. That really addresses the democratic part of our concerns. It outlines a range of reasons why the bill is bad for democracy. Some of those are that the bill is rushed, it's sloppy, and it lacks detail, but it also disrupts widely accepted democratic principles which have evolved over hundreds of years. It creates confusion about the role of the court, the role of ministers, whether Parliament is subjugated to the views of a single minister or a hand-picked board. That's, in our view, it is terrible, terrible law, and it comes at a time when democracies all over the world need all the help that they can get, not rushed, sloppy, and disruptive law like this. Democratic ideals are not nice to haves. They are not only abstract ideas, they have real practical consequences for individuals, communities, and humanity as a whole. In championing this bill, the ACT Party asks us to imagine what human beings could do if they were free to do it for themselves without the politics and bureaucracy. Well, history will tell us exactly what can happen. The democratically elected Nazi Party was free to make 400 laws which gradually eroded Jewish rights and ultimately led to the Holocaust. The South African Parliament was free to remove democratic representation for non-white people during the apartheid era. And in America, the land of the free, slave owners were free to buy and sell human beings. White states were free to, segregate their schools, and gun manufacturers are still free to flood the market with 400 million weapons. In our work at YouthLaw, we see the impact of bad law on children and young people every day. In some cases, the primary cause of this harm is a lack of restraint in the economic and market settings of Aotearoa. New Zealand has the highest vaping rates in the world. This is a travesty, and it's happened because Parliament was too slow to regulate. It persists because Parliament is not willing to regulate and restrict the supply of these products. A major review of online pornography laws in the United Kingdom has found a lack of regulation is causing harm to children in society. This lack of regulation means that people are free to make and view legal but harmful pornography, like choking sex, violence and degrading acts, and content that encourages the sexual abuse of children. Lack of regulations means that people are free to make and use artificial intelligent apps which produce harmful, life-damaging deepfake pornography. This is happening in New Zealand classrooms. Children and young people are being harmed in New Zealand today because the same unregulated markets that happen in the UK are happening here. This bill will limit Parliament's ability to regulate these products and protect children and young people from harmful consequences. Intellectual property rights of the online producers of harmful pornographic content will take priority over the wider public interest of protecting children and young people. The best way to protect children and young people from this harmful content and these harmful products is to restrict its production and circulation. But under this bill, there is every possibility that taxpayers would be expected to compensate producers of this content and these products simply because we wanted to protect our children. This bill is crazy. This is bad enough, but there appears to be a grotesque logic buried in this bill, which is not good for markets. In creating this pathway for compensation, it appears as though this bill actually incentivizes the creation of a new market whereby people will actually create harmful technologies and products, knowing that that will lead to legitimate compensation expectations when they are regulated. I can imagine a society when human beings are free to do it for themselves without politics and bureaucracy, and I don't like what I see. We see it in our work every day. There are two types of freedoms. There is the unrestrained freedom of little or no government, which is the freedom that opens the door to tyranny, injustice, and harm. And then there is democratic freedom, a freedom which is based on human rights. And this is the freedom that promises to protect us all from the extremes of human behaviour. I think this is the second type of freedom that New Zealanders want. It is certainly the type of freedom that our children deserve. And I do not know what the New Zealand First or ACT Party thought they were agreeing to when they agreed to support this bill into law, but I don't think you were agreeing for harmful AI porn production apps or the next Pike River. I urge you to be the champions of democratic freedom and to turn this bill away. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. We've now got Health Coalition Aotearoa. Who's leading you off? Boyd, is it?
Kia ora koutou, so ko Boyd Swinburne toko ingoa. Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity to participate in this very important democratic process.
Welcome, Boyd. We've got 10 minutes, but just to remind you, if you want any questions at the end, just leave some time if you could.
Sure. Yep. Okay. Thanks very much indeed. And thank you for allowing me to participate in this democratic process. Hopefully the weight of the voices of the people that you're hearing will carry through into the appropriate destination for this bill. So I co-chair Health Coalition Aotearoa. It's an alliance of over 60 health and community groups advocating for regulations to reduce the harm from our three biggest killers. That's tobacco, alcohol, and ultra-processed food. So between those three, they create about a third of our preventable annual health loss. So we are very keen on good regulations, but we strongly endorse the thousands of submitters who have pointed out these things that you've probably heard over and over again about the bill failing 3 times and very narrow principles, no certidity, environmental, health or social impact, overwhelming opposition to the bill from the public, from scholars and experts, government agencies and so on. So we believe that this bill is unequivocally not the best way to improve the quality of regulations. But I'd just like to be able to put the public health risks that this bill poses. And the problem that we face in trying to get regulations to prevent harm is not so much that the existing regulations that we have are poor and have been badly written. No, it's that we have too few regulations to constrain the corporate power and the corporate exploitation of people, especially those who are struggling the hardest. So we have this regulatory chill. So New Zealand does very poorly on this front of regulating harm products. We have, for example, no effective regulations to protect children from marketing of alcohol and ultra-processed foods, to control the nicotine and addiction-enhancing chemicals in cigarettes, to prevent the high density of fast food outlets and so on. So this regulatory chill, the lack of regulations, is the threat of pushback from the corporations, and that rather prevents politicians from making the policies in the first place. And this bill, we believe, will undoubtedly increase the levers for regulatory chill, perhaps turning it into a regulatory freeze. So I just want to give a very concrete example of this. So in Australia, Nicola Roxon was a very rare example of a brave health minister who really understood the value of regulations and improving health. And in 2011, she led the passage of the plain packaging of cigarettes into law. So, of course, the government was immediately taken to the High Court by the tobacco industry. Philip Morris changed its headquarters to Hong Kong so that it could use a free trade agreement with Australia and take Australia to an investor-state dispute tribunal, and the industry supported challenges through the World Trade Organizations. So these legal challenges to this piece of public health regulation were multiple. And what were the grounds that the industry used to prosecute its case against the Australian government? Well, it was the acquisition of property and rights without compensation. Its trademarks, designs and colours and so on. that would be unfairly taken away and the government was not going to compensate them for it. And this is exactly the same provisions that are in this bill. So did these challenges succeed, legal challenges? No, they didn't. But the process ran for 9 years, including all the appeals, cost the Australian government more than $50 million to defend it. And it was only after these cases were settled that countries like New Zealand were able to drop the regulatory chill on that and actually implement it ourselves. So they did achieve an increase in regulatory chill for nearly a decade. And so while the officials in the Ministry of Regulations tried to reassure me that corporations would not be able to succeed in using this bill if it passed into law in the same way, I think it's very naive to think that the industry would not weaponize the privileging of its private property and rights in this bill. In fact, this is what this bill is designed to do. So in our view, the best outcome from this select committee process is that it upholds democracy against the ideological drive of a minor party by listening to the people and implementing other ways of achieving better regulation that the Ministry for Regulation and the other government agencies and all the experts that you're hearing from are recommending. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Boyd. We'll go to Mark Cameron.
Afternoon, Boyd. Thank you so much for joining us on the select committee process.
Boyd,
would you be aware that the second chief concern of the constituency currently is that the health sector is underfunded and under-resourced and having a productivity, you might say, productivity crisis? Now, that's the constituency saying that. What do you think the reason for the constituency being so concerned about the health sector in general would be?
Yeah, so the constituency sees health largely as hospitals and GPs and so on, and that surely is overworked. A lot from these preventable diseases for which there are regulations around alcohol, ultra-processed food leading to obesity, diabetes, car crashes, alcohol problems, tobacco, and so on. There are plenty of good regulations which we have not implemented in this country, which would help reduce the pressure on healthcare services. So, yep, hospitals are visible and people see that as a concern, but really we're not doing the prevention well, and that's because we do not have enough good regulations.
Okay, Boyd, as a supplementary, thank you, Mr. Chair, very quickly, how do you then square, sir, that we've gone in 5 years from spending $18 billion on health to now $32 billion, and yet outcomes are worse? Do you think, sir, that there's a case of that we've got, in some instances, poor regulations that perhaps maybe the Ministry of Regulation could weed out so we actually get better productivity to the doctors and nurses?
Yes, I'm not sure what those regulations are that you're talking about that are creating that. I'm talking about the prevention side where we simply just do not have good enough regulations. And I think that this bill will add to that problem. I don't think it's going to reduce it. I think we should be taking the advice of the experts and the agencies about better ways to regulate.
No further questions. Thank you, Boyd.
Thank you, Mark.
Francisco.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your submission, Boyd. One of the things that I'm interested in your submission was you mentioned how there was skepticism you expressed about the reassurances you've had from the Ministry for Regulation officials. They've said to us that Section 24, which is that the Act doesn't confer any legal rights or obligations, means that the corporations being able to use this to have a regulatory chill those concerns aren't valid. Can you explain why you still have concerns despite that assurance, Boyd?
Well, I think that the history shows that these industries with very deep pockets will use whatever legal levers they can. And I use the example of the tobacco and the Australian one, which was pretty clear. But we've seen that also in New Zealand with the alcohol policies, with supermarkets and the alcohol industry preventing the introduction or the proper introduction and implementation of local alcohol policies. So I do think we need good regulations in there to be able to prevent the corporations from weaponizing it and using it. In the end, it may well fail, but don't forget that they are trying to delay and create more chill for these regulations to be in place.
We're still just in time. Megan Woods, the question.
Thank you, Boyd, for your submission. I share your view that the best case scenario is that this bill doesn't pass into law. But we have heard from a previous submitter that if it is going to be passed into law, some suggested amendments, one of which was that it doesn't apply to existing regulations, so it's not a retrospective piece of legislation. Just wondered around your views on that.
Yes, I've seen quite a bit of commentary about its use on retrospective legislation, and I think there's a whole lot of uncertainty about what that's going to mean. I'm not an expert in that space. I think the biggest problem to me sits in the principles that this is privileging a couple of things that need to be taken into account, not the totality of what needs to be taken into account. So if the bill was going to be amended to make it more useful and have better impacts, those principles would need to include all of these things that the submitters are including, and that will then follow into the other regulations and probably then applied to retrospective legislation if that's going to be the case.
Yeah, thank you. We have met time. Thank you, Boyd, for your fulsome
Good,
submission.
thank you.